President of Dallas have indicated that it reflects,
including economic productivity and even spending and investment decisions by households, communities, and businesses. Working together, these three key Fed entities and the unique Federal Reserve System structure established by Congress more than a century ago help promote conditions resulting in a strong, healthy, and sustainable economy. For more information on how the Fed functions, visit federalreserve.gov and click on About the Fed.
Bang, kemana aja nggak nongol? Kemana tuh? Ngapa pen? Sibuk ngurus orang sakit, sibuk turnamen juga. Kita denger lagu dulu guys, karena belum belum muncul ya. The Fed belum mulai.
For the stars, traveling so far, like a dragonfly. Just grab my hand from him, send with me tonight. I run away.
Apa kabar lu? Pane. Kita bentar ya. Aduh, The Fed jadi mempaus ya, mempaus suku bunga cuy. It's good, it's very good ya. Semoga ada kejelasan di konferensi persnya. I'm run away. Enggak bang, gua mau tidur lu bang live. Gua nunggu The Fed cuy, konferensi persnya. Membosankan guys. Jam berapa sih? Setengah jam lagi kan ya? Solana ngacir terus kagak ada koreksinya dah. Solana kayak gitu guys, kalau udah naik tuh susah turun. Kalau udah turun susah naik anjir. Bentar ya.
Hold tight, I've been right where you're standing. Just hold tight to me. The world's
Halvingnya 2024. Kalau ngikut siklus lama sih iya guys. Biasanya di akhir-akhir tahun tapi. Santai aja bro Dai. Ini bentar lagi bulan Desember. Desember biasanya selalu merah cuy. Orang bakal WD itu rata-rata. Tunggu persnya lah. Tunggu persnya lah. Ke atas sih. Kalau gold. Nggak tahu ya guys ya, nanti kita lihat aja ya press conference-nya gimana ya kan. Set anjir menarik nih, koin-koin ini pada menarik ya. Kita tunggu BTC cuma make a base, kita lihatlah potensinya kayak gimana. Anjir kocak banget ini, gila banget ya. BTC dom tinggi banget cok, tapi ada beberapa altcoin lah yang naik ya. Paus kan ya, suku bunga paus nih, suku bunga masih sama cok. Anjir lah ini BTC mantap juga ya. Anjir support gua cuan semua guys. Bang itu 2024 awal halving ya. Belum tahu anjir. Belum tahu guys. Takutnya kita berharap halving, taunya Black Swan anjing. Orang lagi keadaan perang semua guys. Kalau Black Swan itu sesuatu yang nggak bakal kita bisa prediksi ya. lama lah. Seharusnya di 2025 nanti bullnya guys. Harusnya kalau kita ngikut gaya lama ya. Karena terakhir kita bull run itu di 2021. ATH-nya di 2021. Next ATH harusnya 2025. Kalau ngelihat siklus ya. Bang, jadi keputusan the Fed mah masih paus, suku bunganya nggak naik nggak turun guys, masih sama aja. Sama aja sama kayak bulan-bulan kemarin, nggak naik nggak turun. Ini kita nunggu press conference nya. Nanti kalau dia dovish kita baru ngelong gitu ya, kalau dia hawkish kita langsung ke short cok. Tunggu speech dia lah. 12 menit lagi lah. Ini banyak koin baru ya di Binance ini anjir, gua udah lama banget gak buka Binance cok. Ada nama koin Tia. Apa ini? Koin-koin apa ini kayak Tia, terus apa lagi nih? Apa nih koin baru nih? Gas, apa ini anjir koinnya? Ngalin kalian aja guys, yang ngalin guys. Ini gold aja nggak ada pergerakan gitu loh. Nunggu nih. Gila Solana bro, gimana menurut Solana sih? 45 46 guys, paling jauh di 49. 3 area itu kalau dia ngebreak 46 ya kemungkinan di 49. All insured, aduh guys. Sepuluh menit lagi ya. Gaka Kelana. Gue rasa sih short ya. Ini di bulan berapa nih, mirip-mirip guys. 35.000 nih kayak bulan berapa ya? Gue lupa deh. Nggak tahu juga gue banyak lupanya anjir. Biasalah gengs. Banyak lupa gue cok. Itu ETH juga harusnya lebih tinggi tuh. Kalau dia udah masuk area 2000 tuh enak banget tuh ETH tuh. Jual rumah short BTC. Aduh, gue pemain baru bang kripto. Gue pengen belajar gitu, baru belajar gue di kripto bang.
I took our love and I put it on ice. This bed is cold and it don't feel right. Ain't nobody else could love me like that. You love me like that, no. If you give me space, then I'll give you the sky. Yeah, you got me thinking
Ya alin gue takut cok. Tangan gue gemeter.
like that. You love me like that. When I said it so bad, thought I really meant that. Now I'm wanting you back. So just hold me closer. Ain't nobody like us. Now I know. Love me like you did before. Tell me I'm worth fighting for. Show me that there's something more. We can do better. Everybody think we built these walls, but tonight we'll watch them fall. So love me like you did before. We can do better. We can do better.
Kalian ini kalau berteori ngeri banget cok. Asli cuy. Aduh gua bingung guys, gua mau entry apa ya malam ini ya, gua bingung anjir. Mau ke arah mana gitu loh, gua tuh kayak resah dan gelisah guys. Bingung gitu loh. Mau kemana ini market cok? Udah berapa hari nih dia sideways guys BTC 1, 2, 3 ya lebih seminggu lah ya. Tiga lima nggak nih BTC? Kata miliarder boy indikator merah hitam berarti tanda sell. Oh, peler bilang sama dia peler.
Living in my head. Sun came in and closed the blinds. Could feel it in the air. This is just a waste of time. No one really cares. But then you came across my mind. Got me out of there. So I went down to the river and swam till the panic was over. Yes, I went down to the river, watched all the heavy rain.
I want to for you. Lo tahu dia juga Bang Jeff? Kagak tahu gua taunya pembenci kripto sekarang sok-sok jadi influencer kripto guys. Setahu gua itu doang, selebihnya gua nggak kenal. Dia masalah sama Indo Cuan, gua taunya dia bermasalah sama Indo Cuan karena sempat ditantang Indo Cuan tuh dia tuh, karena dia buat grup tapi nggak ada teknikalnya guys, dan nggak ada money management. Kasusnya sama Indo Cuan dia, karena banyak orang ngadu ke Indo Cuan. Masuk sana masa 800.000, masuk gua aja lah. Jelas gua juara turnamen di mana-mana. Baru aja bulan kemarin juara. PNL kita 3M dalam 1 bulan loh. Jangan main-main dia. Dia nunjukin PNL gak berani nanti. Kagak guys, gua bercanda guys. Gua anak baru di kripto, jadi gua mohon bimbingannya ya kakak-kakak. Jangan masukin ke hati. Ngeri banget cok. Lagi-lagi gue jelasin ke kalian, trading itu sesuatu hal yang tidak pasti guys. Dan ilmu trading itu tidak ada kepastian. Jadi 50-50. Ya, mau seanalisa kayak gimana pun, lu market everything as can change gitu. Everything can be changed on market gitu loh. Tidak ada kevalitan dalam suatu market guys. Kalau trading don't talk all about bullshit bro. Nggak bikin cuma iya, dia masalah sama Indo Cukong tuh kemarin tuh, gara-gara dia nggak pakai technical analysis guys. Terus gak ada SL-nya orang harus depo lagi buat nahan floating ya. Karena modal gue gede guys. Solana 45 udah itu. BTC ini 35k kayaknya guys. Kena nih 35 habis itu koreksi lah. Nggak mantep nih kalau FOMC suku bunga nih flat aja. Emang nggak ada grup buat diskusi publik? Kagak guys, karena gua risih dengan bacotan publik guys. Nggak ada bro. Nah lu tahu nggak, ngurus grup itu puyeng guys, apalagi misalkan grup publik gitu. Beuh. Paham kan, orang tuh ada jiwa jagonya guys. Di urat-urat mereka tuh ada jiwa-jiwa jagonya guys. Udah ya, kalian doang, lu tanya aja tuh, lu cari tahu tuh kasus Indo Cukong tuh, kemarin ditantang Indo Cukong kok. Lu buka telegramnya Indo Cukong dah, gua lupa tuh bulan apa tuh. Waktu itu zaman orang masuk grup dia tuh masih 1 jutaan. Gua komen juga tuh di Indo Cukong. Part 5 Solana itu udah reject guys, 45 46 lah rejectnya. Mentok di 46 46,6. I'm gonna give up. Wih, sudah mulai nih The Fed nih.
We will make decisions about the extent of additional policy firming and how long policy will remain restrictive based on the totality of the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. I'll have more to say about monetary policy after briefly reviewing economic developments. Recent indicators suggest that economic activity has been expanding at a strong pace and well above earlier expectations. In the third quarter, real GDP is estimated to have risen an outsized annual rate of 4.9%, boosted by a surge in consumer spending. After picking up somewhat over the summer, activity in the housing sector has flattened out and remains well below levels of a year ago, largely reflecting higher mortgage rates. Higher interest rates also appear to be weighing on business fixed investment. The labor market remains tight, but supply and demand conditions continue to come into better balance. Over the past 3 months, payroll job gains averaged 260,000
Besok NFP ya.
jobs per month.
Anjing lah, banyak banget event nih, anjir.
That seen earlier in the year. The unemployment rate remains low at 3.8%.
Ini kasih subs gak ngerti.
Strong job creation has been accompanied by
Gak ada subtitlenya Bang Di, udah diaktifin ini.
has moved up since late last year.
Ada cowok.
For individuals aged 25 to 54 years.
Kalian kedenger gak? Denger lah ya.
To pre-pandemic levels. Nominal wage growth has shown some signs of easing, and job vacancies have declined so far this year. Although the jobs to workers gap has narrowed, labor demand still exceeds the supply of available workers. Inflation remains well above our longer run goal of 2%. Total PCE prices rose 3.4% over the 12 months ending in September. Excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 3.7%. Inflation has moderated since the middle of last year, and readings over the summer were quite favorable. But a few months of good data are only the beginning of what it will take to build confidence that inflation is moving down sustainably toward our goal.
Gak ada subtitlenya cowok.
Sustainably down to 2% has a long way to go. Despite elevated inflation, longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. The Fed's monetary policy actions are guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. We are highly attentive to the risks that high inflation poses to both sides of our mandate, and we are strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% objective. As I noted earlier, since early last year, we have raised our policy rate by 5.25 percentage points, and we have decreased our securities holdings by more than $1 trillion. Our restrictive stance of monetary policy is putting downward pressure on economic activity and inflation. The committee decided at today's meeting to maintain the target range for the federal funds rate at 5.25 to 5.5%, and to continue the process of significantly reducing our securities holdings. We are committed to achieving a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation sustainably down to 2% over time, and to keeping policy restrictive until we are confident that inflation is on a path to that objective. We are attentive to recent data showing the resilience of economic growth and demand for labor. Evidence of growth persistently above potential, or that tightness in the labor market is no longer easing, could put further progress on inflation at risk and could warrant further tightening of monetary.
Kalian bisa bahasa Inggris gak guys?
Financial conditions have tightened significantly in recent months, driven by
Nih ya, gue simpulin ya.
long-term bond yields.
Gue simpulin nih kata-kata yang Powell bilang tadi.
Persistent changes in financial conditions
Dia bilang full effect of tightening yet to be felt. Dia bilang. Jadi efek penuh pengetatan belum terasa. Dia bilang. Ekonomi has expand. Ekonomi berjalan bagus sesuai dengan ekspektasi dia. Terus labor demand, pekerja, demand ini permintaan pekerja masih bisa memenuhi permintaan, dia bilang.
The lags with which monetary policy affects economic activity and inflation, and economic and financial developments. We remain committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal and to keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Reducing inflation is likely to require a period of below potential growth and some softening of labor market conditions. Restoring price stability is essential to set the stage for achieving maximum employment and stable prices over the longer run. To conclude, we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Howard Schneider with Reuters. Thank you, Chair Powell, for doing this. To what you referenced the rise in long-term bond yields, to what degree did that supplant action by the Fed at this meeting?
Thanks for your question. So I'll talk about bond yields, but I want to take a second and just sort of set the broader context in which we're looking at that. So if you look at the situation, let's look at the economy first. Inflation has been coming down, but it's still running well above our 2% target. The labor market has been rebalancing, but it's still very tight by many measures. GDP growth has been strong, although many forecasters are forecasting, and they have been forecasting, that it will slow. As for the committee, we are committed to achieving a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation down to 2% over time. And we're not confident yet that we have achieved such a stance. So that is the broader context into which the strong economy and all the things I said, that's the context in which we're looking at this
Breakout downtrend. Maksudnya breakout downtrend?
So obviously we're monitoring, we're attentive to the increase in longer-term yields, and which have contributed to a tightening of broader financial conditions since the summer. As I mentioned, persistent changes in broader financial conditions can have implications for the path of monetary policy. In this case, the tighter financial conditions we're seeing from higher long-term rates, but also from other sources like the stronger dollar and lower equity prices could matter for future rate decisions as long as two conditions are satisfied. The first is that the tighter conditions would need to be persistent, and that is something that remains to be seen. But that's critical. Things are fluctuating back and forth. That's not what we're looking for. With financial conditions,
Hawkish,
we're looking for
ngetik
persistent.
aja salah kalian guys.
The second thing is that the longer-term rates that have moved up, they can't simply be a reflection of expected policy moves from us. That we would then, that if we didn't follow through on them, then the rates would come back down. So, and I would say on that, it does not appear that an expectation of higher near-term policy rates is causing the increase in longer-term rates. So, in the meantime, though, perhaps the most important thing is that these higher Treasury yields are showing through to higher borrowing costs for households and businesses, and those higher costs are going to weigh on economic activity to the extent this tightening persists. And the mind's eye goes to the 8%, near 8% mortgage rate, which could have pretty significant effect on housing. So that's how I would answer your question.
Just as a quick follow-on to be clear on this, in your opening statement and just now, you seem to imply that you are not yet confident that financial conditions are restrictive enough to finish the fight. Is that true?
Yes, that's exactly right. You know, to say it a different way, we haven't made any decisions about future meetings. We have not made a determination, and I will say that we're not confident at this time that we've reached such a stance. We're not confident that we haven't, we're not confident that we have. And that is the way we're going to be going into these future meetings, is to be, you know, just determining the extent of any additional further policy tightening that may be appropriate to return inflation to 2% over time.
Hi, Chair Powell. Thank you so much for taking our questions. I wonder, you know, if you don't raise interest rates in December, would the presumption be that
Kagak
at that
trade
point
soul
that we should
break,
expect
kagak.
rates are at their
Gua aja
peak,
baru
or
aktif
is
hari.
there a possibility of restarting rate increases next year? And are there any costs to taking a more extended pause?
So let me start by saying we haven't made a decision about September. You're asking a hypothetical there, but we're going into the December meeting. We'll get, as you know, 2 more inflation readings, 2 more labor market readings, some data on economic activity, and so we'll be taking, and also the broader situation, the broader financial condition situation, and broader world situation. We'll be looking at all those things as we make a decision in December. We haven't made that decision. I would say, though, that the idea that the idea that you would be difficult to raise again after stopping for a meeting or 2, it's just not right. I mean, the committee will always do what it thinks is appropriate at the time. And again, we haven't made any decisions at all about December. We didn't talk about making a decision in December today. Really, it was a decision for this meeting and understanding broader things.
Nick Timmeros of the Wall Street Journal. Chair Powell, did the Fed staff put a recession back into the baseline forecast in the materials for today's meeting? And how much does this tightening in financial conditions substitute for rate hikes if the tightening is persistent? You had said it was worth maybe a quarter point when we had the bank failures in the spring. What is it here?
So ngaceng ada news gak bang, nutup pagi di 46 guys. Kalau breakout 46-nya, 46,6-nya di break,
I don't want to answer
49.50 itu
about the
bisa.
recession, but the answer is no. I think I have to answer.
Nggak tahu itu soal
since we
kenapa.
did publicly say in the minutes. You'll know anyway in the minutes. The staff did not put a recession back in. I mean, it would be hard to see how you would do that if you look at the activity we've seen recently, which is not really indicative of a recession in the near term. In terms of how to think about translation into rate hikes, I think it's just too early to be doing that. And the main reason is we just don't know how persistent this will be. You can see how volatile it is. Different kinds of news will affect the level of rates. And I think any kind of an estimate that was, you know, precise would hang out there and have a great chance of looking wrong very quickly. So I think what we can say
Cuan
is
BTC down baru masukin altcoin anjay, ngeri banget kalian nih guys.
That consumers and households and businesses are paying now, and over time that will have an effect. We just don't know how persistent it's going to be, and it's tough to try to translate that in a way that I'd be comfortable communicating into how many rate hikes that is.
If I could follow up, I guess what makes you confident that tighter financial conditions will slow above trend growth when 500 basis points of rate hikes, QT, and a minor banking crisis have not thus far?
Well, that's you know, the way our policy works is, and sometimes it works with lags, of course, which can be long and variable, but ultimately, if you raise raise interest rates, you do see those effects, and you see those effects in the economy now. You see what's happening in the housing market. You're seeing that now. You'll see, if you look at surveys of people, it's not
Lebih ngacang Susi, cowok, daripada Seoul. Susi itu ngacang banget loh.
I mentioned again, we're getting reports from housing that the effects of this could be quite significant. But you're right. This has been a resilient economy, and it's, I think, been surprising in its resilience. And there are a number of possible reasons why that may be. Our job is to achieve maximum.
Susi itu ngeri banget,
So
anjir.
we take the economy as it comes. It has been resilient. So we take it as it is.
Thank you. Colby Smith with the Financial Times. In terms of the thresholds that you've laid out of what could warrant further tightening, the additional evidence of persistently above trend growth or some kind of reversal in the recent easing of labor market tightness, that
Susi
seems to
gue dapat
suggest something more
0,88
powerful than
nih.
just one
Wadah,
more
mantep
quarter
banget
point
itu, Bray.
rate hike would be necessary, and I'm just curious if
Real,
that's how
cuy.
the committee sees it.
So we've identified those
Rezeki,
factors.
Cok.
Those are not meant to be the only factors or a specific test that we're going to be applying with some metrics behind it. Really, we're going to be looking at the broader picture. And, what's happening with our progress toward the 2% inflation goal? Is the labor market continuing to broadly cool off and achieve a better balance? We'll be looking at that. Growth, we look at growth insofar as it has implications for our two mandate goals. We look at that. And we look at broader financial conditions. So we'll be looking at
Suku
all
bunga
of
udah
those
keluar,
things as
guys.
we reach a
Nggak ada
judgment.
kenaikan, nggak ada penurunan.
Whether we need to further tighten policy. And if we do reach that judgment, then we will further tighten policy.
Okay, and just in terms of the tightening of financial conditions, if that is having some kind of offsetting
Uni,
effect in terms of
uni
leading
swap
to
ya.
potentially
Ini
again,
Dex lagi
rates,
gila-gilanya.
what then is the potential impact on the trajectory of rate cuts? Could we see those maybe pulled forward or have to see more
Gua nggak ada
than
Susi,
what
Cok.
the September
Di spot
SEP
maupun
indicated?
feature-nya nggak ada.
So
Bang
it's,
Susi.
the fact is, the committee is not thinking about rate cuts right now at all. We're not talking about rate cuts. We're still very focused on the first question, which is, have we achieved a stance of monetary policy that's sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation down to 2% over time, sustainably? That is the question we're focusing on. The next question, as you know, will be, for how long will we remain restrictive? Will policy remain restrictive? And what we said there is that we'll keep policy restrictive until we're confident that inflation is on a sustainable path down to 2%. That'll be the next question. But honestly, right now, we're really tightly focused on the first question. The question of rates cuts just doesn't come up because I think the first, it's so important to get that first question, as close to right as you can.
Steve Leisman,
I'm gonna
CNBC.
give
Mr. Chair,
up.
I guess I had assumed that there was a tightening bias in the committee. You say in the statement you're looking to assess the appropriate stance of monetary policy, the extent to which you may need to hike additionally. You didn't say earlier that you were sufficiently restrictive. There were
Haukis
forecasts
kah, Bang?
of 2 rate hikes
Belum
among
kelar ini, Cok.
members of the committee. But then you just said that we haven't made a determination. Would you
Paling
say
jam
the
setengah
bias
3
right
ini
now
kelar ataupun jam
is
2.
neutral, that there is no
Habis itu close
disposition
candle
to hike
4
again,
jam.
and that the committee largely has moved off of this forecast for 2 hikes? Or sorry, 1 additional
I
hike
think
this
you're
year?
talking about one additional.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I would say, the language, looking at it here, in determining the extent of additional policy firming that may be appropriate to return inflation 2% over time, that's the question we're asking.
So is it right to think of that as a hiking bias is still in the committee here?
We haven't used that term, but it's fair to say that's the question we're asking is, should we hike more? It's not, and that is the question, and you're right, that in September, we wrote down 1 additional rate hike, but, we'll write down another forecast, as you know, in December.
Thank you, Chris Rugaber at Associated Press. Well, since the last meeting, the auto workers' strike has finished, oil prices have leveled off, and yet on the other hand, you have the outbreak of war between...
TV longsor,
How
waduh.
do you see all those factors taken together affecting the economy going forward? How are you thinking about those?
So there are significant issues out there.
Masih di
As you
sana-sana
point
aja,
out,
Cok.
Global geopolitical tensions are certainly elevated, and that goes for the war in Ukraine, it goes for the war between Israel and Hamas. We're monitoring that. Our job is to monitor those things for their economic implications.
Geopolitikal,
So
dia bahas
the
geopolitik ini.
UAW strike, as you point out, appears to be coming to an end. Oil prices have flattened out. They haven't gone down, but I guess they've gone down a little bit from their earlier peak. Another one is the possibility of government shutdown. We don't know about that one. So there's plenty of risk out there. But I would go back to the bigger picture from our standpoint is we've got a very strong economy, strong labor market, making progress on the labor market, making progress on inflation, and we're very focused on
Panas-panas anjir.
getting confident
Masih gue
that we
nyala.
have achieved a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive. That's really our focus.
Great. And just one quick thing. You, last month, had gone to York, Pennsylvania, where you talked to a lot of, last month, where you talked to a lot of small business owners. Just curious, what sentiments did you hear from them, or what did you picked up on, and was there anything that surprised you the most in terms of what they talked about?
I wouldn't say I was terribly surprised. I was very impressed by York as a town with a real strategy, and I would say it's very impressive what the people there have put together in the face of some difficult longer run trends about offshoring of manufacturing and that kind of thing. They've done a great job as a city, I think. What you hear and is consistent there, which is
Oh, Bang Di, lu masih ada di sini nggak?
inflation. You were there. We talked to some people who, were feeling that in their businesses, and other people who were feeling it in their home lives as well. It's painful for people, particularly people who don't have a lot of extra financial resources, who are spending most of their income on the essentials of life. So we know that wasn't new, but that did come through very clearly in the conversations we had in New York. And I walked away from that even. Just thinking that we really, the best thing we can do for the U.S. is to restore price stability, fully restore price stability, and not fail in that task, and do it as quickly as possible, but also...
Gak gerak cuy, sini-sini aja anjir. Apa ler lah.
Hi, Chair Powell. Rachel Siegel from the Washington Post. Thanks for taking our questions. You've spoken before about the pain that would likely be coming for the economy in order to get inflation down. But since the economy has not responded to rate hikes in ways that would normally be expected, have you changed your views on that at all, on how necessary or inevitable that kind of pain would be, say, for the labor market or overall growth?
That's all ya. Wah, Sol udah hit guys.
Everyone has been very gratified to see that we've been able to achieve, pretty significant progress on inflation without seeing the kind of increase in unemployment that has been very typical of rate hiking cycles like this one. So that's a historically unusual and very welcome result. And the same is true of growth. We've been saying that we need to see below potential growth, and growth has been strong, but yet we're still seeing this. I still believe, and my colleagues, for the most part, I think still believe, that it is likely to be true. It is still likely to be true, not a certainty, but likely, that we will need to see some slower growth and some softening in labor market conditions to get to fully restore price stability. So, but it's only a good thing that we haven't seen, and I think we know why. Since we lifted off, we have understood that there are really two.
Tanya ke Paul itu biasanya dari mana Bang? Dari nggak tahu guys, dari media, terus Bloomberg biasanya. Terus apa lagi ya? Fed Dallas kalau nggak salah. Pelaku pasar semua itu guys. Terus ada yang petinggi-petingginya biasanya.
But it's that first one can bring down inflation without the need for higher unemployment or slower growth. It's supply side improvements like shortages and bottlenecks and that kind of thing going away. It's getting a significant increase in the size of the labor market now, both from labor force participation and from immigration. That's a big supply side gain that is really helping the economy. It's part of why GDP is so high, is because we're getting that supply. So we welcome that, but I think those things will run their course, and we're probably still going to be left, we think, and I think, still be left with some ground to cover to get back to full price stability, and that's where monetary policy and what we do with demand is still going to be important.
Short keras harusnya dari 46,6 guys kalau kalian mau nge-short Solana itu.
If you have an economy that's been so resilient to high rate increases, does that suggest to you that there isn't necessarily this huge wave of tightening that's still coming through the pipeline, and that it may have already come into effect?
I continue to think it's very hard to say. So it's been 1 year at this meeting. 1 year ago, this was the fourth of our 75 basis points hikes. So that's a full year since then. I think we are seeing the effects of all the hiking we did last year, and this year we're seeing it. it's very hard to know exactly.
Apakah halving ini bareng sama kenaikan dolar, Bang? Seharusnya enggak sih ya. Kalau kenaikan dolar mah, lu kalau masih hidup sama orang tua lu mah masih enak, guys. Harga-harga yang di Indonesia seharusnya naik semua kalau dolar naik. Dolar sekarang 16.000 anjir. Gua mau lihat tuh. Dengan dolar 16.000 harga semua barang seharusnya naik, apalagi barang-barang impor. Dan kalau Indonesia harga semuanya naik, pendapatannya kecil, ya krisis, guys. Indonesia ya. Negara lain juga yang punya utang ke Amerika, bayar bunga dengan dolar yang naik tinggi, bunga naik tinggi juga. Miskin teratur negaranya, guys.
Michael McKee from Bloomberg Television and Radio. Trying to connect the dots here. One quick clarification I want to ask about Rachel's question is, you said you need slower growth. You had always said before a period of lower than trend growth. Has that changed? And two, it sounds to me like you're basically saying here that the dot plot's out the window, that every meeting is live with the possibility of a rate increase for right now. It doesn't matter about the turn of the year, and that there's not an objective way to determine whether or not you've got enough tightening in the system. It's just going to be a subjective judgment meeting by meeting.
Well, so let's talk about the dot plot first. So the dot plot is a picture in time of what the people in the committee thinks is likely to be an appropriate monetary policy in light of their own personal economic forecast. In principle, when things change, that's not like a plan that anybody's agreed to or that we will do. That's a forecast that would change, for example. I mean, many things could change that would cause people to say, I wouldn't write down that dot, 6 weeks later. Think of the number of things that could change your mind on that. So I think the efficacy of the dot plot probably decays over the
sampai 2126 ya.
Between that meeting and the next
atas
meeting.
ini.
Nonetheless, it's out there, and we do personally update our forecast, but we don't formally update the dot plot. So, I think we try to be as transparent as we can about the way we're thinking about these things. We're laying out there our thinking, and as we approach the meeting, we'll all, my colleagues and I will be talking about how we're processing that data. In terms of, we're not really changing the way, in terms of growth, what I said was below potential. So what you have here recently is growth that is temporarily, potential growth is elevated for a year or two right now over its trend level. So the right way to think about it is what's potential growth this year. People think trend growth over a long period of time is a little bit less than 2%, or I would say just around 2%. But what we've had is with the improvement in the size of the labor force, as I mentioned, through both participation and immigration, and with the better functioning in the labor market, and with the unwinding of the supply chain and shortages and those kinds of things, you're seeing actually elevated potential growth. There's catch-up growth that can happen in potential. And that means that if you could be growing at 2% this year and still be growing below the increase in the potential output of the economy. I hope that's clear. That's really what's going on. That's why I would say it as below potential.
But if you could clarify what I asked about meeting by meeting, are we essentially now supposed to assume that it's a meeting by meeting, live meeting with a chance of a rate increase that will be decided on subjective criteria rather than objective at each meeting?
I don't know that I want to just accept anybody's characterization. I'll tell you how we're doing this. So we're going meeting by meeting. We're asking ourselves whether we've achieved a stance of policy to bring inflation down to 2% over time.
Susi sama Sol yang lagi dimainin. Kita lihat guys ini Solana nih.
Conditions and all of those things that we look at, and then we've come very far with this rate hiking cycle, very far. And you saw the spread at the September meeting of, it's a relatively small spread of people think 1 or 2 additional hikes. So you're close to the end of the cycle. That was an impression as of a belief as of September. It's not a promise or a plan of the future. And so we're going into these meetings one by one, we're looking at the data. As I mentioned, we're also, we're being careful, we're proceeding carefully because we can proceed carefully at this time. Monetary policy is restrictive. We see its effects, particularly in intersensitive spending and other channels. So that's our thing.
Solana gua makan, Cok.
Thanks. Chair Powell, Neil Irwin with Axios.
Entry di 46.
Long-term yields we've seen the last several weeks. Have you given any consideration to the pace of your asset runoff program? And if there were a judgment that the higher term premium was endangering the dual mandate goals, would that be reason to think about slowing or suspending QT, or should we think of that as more of a technical question around reserves?
So committee is not considering changing the pace of balance sheet runoff. It's not something we're
Tinggal nunggu
considering.
gold.
And I know there are many
Sama
candidate
crude
explanations
oil.
for why rates have been going up. And QT is certainly on that list. It may be playing a relatively small effect, although I would say at $3.3 trillion in reserves, it's not, I think it's hard to make a case that reserves are even close to scarce at this point. So that's not something that we're looking at right now.
Hi, Victoria Guido with Politico. I wanted to ask about the Basel III
Eh,
capital proposal.
Dwi, yang lu beli spot yang gua saran-saranin itu seharusnya udah cuan lah ya. Iya nggak sih? Anjir, spot gua gila, Cok. Nggak nyangka, anjir. Lumayan lah. Nabung dari 2022, guys. Panennya mendekati 2024, anjir.
And we'll take them seriously. We'll read them. I'll say what I do expect is that we will come to we're a consensus-driven organization. We'll come to a package that has broad support on the board.
So does broad support mean more support than the proposal had?
It means broad support.
Harusnya gol ini naik, Cok.
Janelle Marte with Bloomberg. So, in addition to persistence, when you look at long-term treasury yields, what else are you watching to evaluate how those tighter financial conditions are hitting the economy, and if it will lessen the need for further tightening? Also, do you think that those higher yields could affect banking stress?
So what do we look at?
Fed bilang we are close to the end of the cycle. Kita hampir mendekati akhir dari putaran ini. Tapi untuk cut rate dia bilang belum tahu tuh kapan tuh.
There's a very rich environment, and we tend to look at a few of them. I'm not going to give you the names, but they're
Terus dia bilang softening in labor market to restore price stability.
The level of equity prices, the level of rates, the credit spreads. Sometimes they're pulling in credit availability and things like that. So it isn't any one thing. We would never look at, for example, long-term treasury rates in isolation, nor will we ignore them. But we would look at them as part of a broader picture. And they do play a role, of course, in many of the major standard financial condition indexes. Your second question was banking stress. So it's something we're watching. As you know, we did have there were issues with interest rate risk and also funding uninsured deposits in the March, the things we went through in March and thereafter. And so we've been working a lot with financial institutions to make sure that they have good funding plans and that they have a plan for how to deal with the kind of portfolio unrealized losses that they have. We do think the banking system is quite resilient. We had a handful of bank failures, but so that's what we're out there doing, and we don't have any reason to think that these rate hikes are materially changing that picture, which is one of a strong banking system and one where there's a strong focus by banks and by supervisors.
Waktunya kita mengirim sinyal-sinyal, guys. Kita lihat Susi. Oke, kita udah lihat Susi. Habis itu kita lihat selain Susi, kita lihat Sol. Waktunya prepare buat entry, guys. Aduh, apa ini, Cok?
Yeah, so you're right. We put a proposal out for comment is what we did. And, this is a job that Congress assigned us, as you of course know, in Dodd-Frank, and all we can really do is faithfully implement the
Ya,
statute.
goal mulai
That's all we're trying to
recovery.
do. What else can we really do? It's a 90-day comment period. We typically don't comment on these things once they're out for comment. And we do hope that stakeholders, and we know that they will use this opportunity to express their views. They haven't been shy about that. So that's critical, and that's what I can say about that now.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Edward Lawrence with Fox Business. So over the last 3 months, the year-over-year PCE inflation was at 3.4%, core well over 3%. You've said in the past 2% remains the Federal Reserve target, but with no rate increase today, how long would you be okay then with a 3% or 3% plus overall inflation?
The progress is probably going to come in lumps and be bumpy, but we're making progress. I think the core PCE came down by almost 60 basis points in the third quarter. So the best thing I could point you to would be the September SEP, where the expectation was that inflation by the end of next year on a 12-month trailing basis would be well into the twos, and the year after that further into the twos. So that's if you look historically, that's sort of consistent with the way inflation comes in. It does take some time, and as you get further and further from those highs, it may actually take a longer time. But the good news is we're making progress, and monetary policy is restrictive, and we feel like we're on a path to make more progress, and it's essential that we do.
You've said in the past that doing too little on interest rates could take years to fix, but the cost of doing too much could be easily fixed. How robust was the debate about this pause on the doing too little side?
That's always the question we're asking ourselves, and we know that if we fail to restore price stability, the risk is that expectations of higher inflation get entrenched in the economy, and we know that that's really bad for people. Inflation will be both higher and more volatile. That's a prescription for misery, and so we're really committed to not letting that happen. For the first year or so of our tightening cycle, the risk was all on the side of not doing enough. We've come far enough that the risks have gotten more two-sided. You can't identify that with a lot of precision, but it does feel like the risks are more two-sided now. But we're committed to getting inflation back down to our target over time, and we will.
Simon Rabinovich with The Economist. Quick follow-up to the question about banking stresses. You talked about how the banking system is resilient. Of course, part of the resilience in the past year stems from the Bank Term Funding Program that you launched in March. Given that bond prices have not recovered, that unrealized losses are probably making, how likely is it that you might have to extend that program?
I'm gonna give up for you.
Good question. We haven't really been thinking about that yet. It's November 1, and that's a decision we'll be making in the first quarter of next year.
Sorry, quick separate question about inflation expectations. The Michigan Sentiment Survey showed a big jump in 1 year ahead inflation expectations last month from 3.2 to 4.2. Last year, you said that particular survey was a really decisive factor in one of your rate hike decisions. If it stays elevated next time around, how big of an input will that be into your December thinking?
Yeah, we look at a range of things. I think the thing got blown out of proportion a little bit. It was actually a preliminary estimate that got revised away, and I said it was preliminary in that, but that didn't get picked up. So we look at many things. I mean, so really look across the broad array of surveys and also market-based estimates, and we do that really carefully at every meeting and between meetings. And it's just clear that inflation expectations are in a good place. The public does believe that inflation will get back down to 2% over time, and it will. They're right. So, and there's no real crack in that armor. You can always find one reading that is a little bit out of whack, but honestly, the bulk of them are just very clear that the public believes that inflation will come down.
TP long term kita di 4,1.
Hi, Chair Powell. Megan Casella with Barron's. Thanks for taking our questions. I wanted to see if you could talk about the neutral rate. You mentioned today that you're still debating whether rates are sufficiently restrictive, and you've recently said that evidence is suggesting policy is not too tight right now. So I was curious if you could elaborate on that at all and whether that means the neutral rate.
I'm gonna give up.
Yeah. So
I'm gonna
first thing to
give
say
up
is
for
that
you.
it's very important. It's a very important
Is it
variable
you
in the way
between us
we think about monetary policy, but you can't identify it with any precision in real time. And we know that. So you have to just take that. You have to take your estimate with a grain of salt. What we know now is, within a range of estimates of the neutral rate, policy is restrictive, and it's therefore putting downward pressure on economic activity, hiring, and inflation. So we do talk about this. There's not any debate or attempt to sort of agree as a group on whether R-star has moved or not. Some people think it has. Some people haven't said that don't think it has. Ultimately, it's unknowable, and so really, again, what we're focused on is looking at the data and giving ourselves a little more time now to look carefully at the data, by being careful in our moves. Does it feel like monetary policy is restrictive enough to bring inflation down to 2% over time? That's the question we're asking ourselves. I think years from now, economists will be revising their estimates of R-star as it existed on November 1, 2023. We can't really wait for that in making policy. We have to we have to have those models and look at them and think about them, and ultimately we've got to look at the effects that policy's having, accounting for the lags, which makes it difficult.
If I could follow up on a wages point earlier, you talked about the inflation outlook, but I'm curious if you have any concerns whether wage inflation at its current level could risk pushing up overall inflation or reacceleration.
So if you look at the broad range of wages, they have wage increases have really come down significantly over the course of the last 18 months to a level where they're substantially closer to that level that would be consistent with 2% inflation over time, making standard assumptions about productivity over time. So it's much closer than it was. And that's true of
Gold potensi naik ya Bang, iya gua nge-buy gold guys. Dari tadi kan gua bilang tuh, gold kayaknya naik. 1970. Gua dapatnya di 19 71935, 17 19 715. Lumayan cowok. 100 pips lah.
Substantially in June, and then the September reading was more or less at the same level as the June reading. So in a way, it's just validating that decline, and it was very close to our expectations internally too. So I think we feel good about that. Also, I would say it isn't, in my thinking, it's not the case that wages have been the principal driver of inflation so far. Although I think
sampai jam berapa Bang? Sampai Paul kelar
as we
guys.
go forward, as monetary policy becomes more important relative to the supply side issues I've talked about and the unwinding of the pandemic effects, it may be that the labor market becomes more important over time too.
Hi, Nancy Marshall-Genzer with Marketplace. Chair Paul, are you now as concerned about overshooting and raising interest rates too much as you are about getting...
Gold kalau lu dapat 1970, dia ke 1980 tadi udah 100 pips guys.
I think for much of the last year and a half, the concern
Lumayan,
was
cuy.
not doing too much, not doing enough. It was not getting rates high enough in time.
Dia harus break di 1982 itu kalau gold. Kalau break 1982 tambah lebih nikmat tuh kalau yang nge-buy. Tapi kalau kena reject ya mau gimana
You
cok.
can see by the fact that we have slowed down, although we're still trying to gain confidence in what the appropriate stance is. But you can see that we think, and I think, that the risks are getting more balanced. I'll just say that they're getting more balanced. The risk of doing too much versus the risk of doing too little are getting closer to balance, because policy is I think clearly restrictive at 5.25.
19 tadi lah, 1980 itu udah lu harus warning tuh. Kecuali dia close candle di 1982 ya. Kalau dia closing candlenya di atas 1982, besoknya pertanda bagus tuh buat gold.
Well above mainstream estimates of a neutral policy rate. Now that's arithmetic. It doesn't really. What the proof is really in how the economy reacts. But I would say that we're in a place where those risks are getting closer to being in balance.
How the economy reacts. What are you looking at to be sure you're not overshooting?
Well, I think what we're looking at is is inflation still
BTC nggak gerak guys.
Broadly cooling?
Anjir.
Is it sort of validating the path we saw?
BTC nggak gerak cok. 34.500 doang dari tadi.
Now we've seen periods like that before and they just
seperti terakhir gua live di YouTube lah. Kalau bisa dapat 35 tuh cakep tuh nge-short tuh. Kemarin sempet turun 33.800. Live terakhir gua juga bilang 33 itu area koreksi guys. Kemungkinan mantulnya di 33 ribuan.
And with labor demand still clearly remaining very strong.
Ini kayak Solana nih, 46,6 nih. Cakep banget, Cok. Re-entry-nya dia pasti backtest, guys. Backtest harusnya di 44, 45. Solana. Kalau Susi backtest 12 sabi kali. Avax. Nanti ya. Bentar cuy. Gua lagi ngecek market nih guys buat masuk apa ya? Bingung cok. Avax cakep nih ya. Udah 12 cuy. Untung gua serok Avax di spotnya. Link juga tuh. Link tuh imba banget tuh. Anjir lah. Avax masih still strong nih. 12,7 masih ada potensi tuh. 12,7 ada resisten tuh dia Avax. Kita lihat Susi lah guys. Susi ini sekali cuan banget guys. Tinggal tunggu area dia testingnya tuh ke area mana. Serius gua. Ini target atas ya guys. Susi 12680 kalau breakout 12680 berarti dia ke 13461 ya. Next atasnya 13483.
Which continues to drive more hiring.
Bingung
So
gua
you
cok.
had a really that whole dynamic has been, and also at the same time, the pandemic effects are wearing off, so that goods availability, automobile availability is better or was better.
Serius gua bingung banget mau masuk apa guys. Kalian ada rekomendasi nggak?
More people to hire, and it's more labor supply. So the whole thing has led to more growth, more spending, and that kind of thing. And it's been, it's been good. And the thing is, we've been achieving progress on inflation in the middle of this. So it's been a dynamic. The question is, how long can that continue? And I just think the existence of this second set of factors at this time, which is the unwinding of the pandemic effects, that's what makes this cycle unique, I think. And we're still learning. That took longer for that process to begin than we thought, and we're still learning about how it plays out. That's all we can do.
Gold kalau breakout 1982 sih 1987, 1993 potensi bisa di hit guys. Tapi kalau gagal breakout ya balik lagi dia.
Hamas conflict. The Fed's financial stability report said the Israel-Hamas conflict and the conflict in Ukraine pose important risks to global economic activity, including the possibility of sustained disruptions to regional trade in food, energy, and other commodities.
Akhirnya bingung gua mau masuk apa.
Surge in oil prices if the war spreads to other countries in the region. I'm just wondering
Apa
how
di
the Fed's
113 gitu loh masuknya.
You mentioned they are, and just what the potential economic impact could be if the conflict does spread to other countries in the region. Thank you.
I wouldn't want to speculate too much, but I'll just say so, really the question there is, does the war spread more widely, and does it start to do things like affect oil prices in particular, since this is the Middle East we're talking about? The price of oil has really not reacted very much so far to this. As the Fed, as the Federal Open Market Committee, our job is really to understand the economy and the economic effects. And it isn't clear at this point that the conflict in the Middle East is on track to have significant economic effects. That doesn't mean it isn't incredibly important and something for people to take really important notice of. But it may or may not turn out to be something that matters for the Federal Open Market Committee as an economic body. But what the Financial Stability Report does is it calls out risks, and that's what it's doing, is calling out a risk of that. And the war in Ukraine, the same. The war in Ukraine, did have immediately very significant macroeconomic implications because of the connection to commodities. So, thank you. Thanks very much.
Udah kelar tuh Powell tuh. Gak banyak ya yang dikeluarin statement dia ya tentang malam ini, Cok. Gak banyak, cuy. Dia cuma bilang take some time for inflation to come down. Terus dia bilang inflation expectation are in good place. Dia bilang, ya intinya dia sangat amat standarisasi ya, tidak hawkish, tidak juga dovish guys, tapi lebih banyak dovishnya ya. Lebih menenangkan dia guys, perkataan dia malam ini lebih menenangkan banyak pihak dari statement dia. Jir, gue mau ngirim sinyal apa ya? Mau long apa short ya? Jangan dipaksa bang, bingung guys. Kalau nggak malam ini jam pagi lah. Intinya gold masih naik gitu ya. Kalian entry apa cok hari ini? Hari ini gue belum ada entry wih. Gua sih ngincer sushi sih guys. Ini sushi nih alik banget nih. Sushi ini kayak Mina terakhir ya. Mina itu gue cuan gedenya di Mina guys. Waktu itu gue entry Mina di area terakhir di sinyal gue tuh kapan ya? Mina gue entry longnya di area 0,363. Anjir itu gila banget dia naiknya. Terus gua entry EOS sama NIR di 1025, EOS di 0,55. Itu hacep banget cok, Mina cok. Mina. Sekarang Mina 0,58. Kemarin sempet pumpnya gila cuy, sampai 0,8 anjir. Gue entry-nya 0,3an. Gila banget cok. Entry apa nih? Aduh, Solana udah turun guys. Gold 1981. Tinggal sushi. Susi sampai berapa tuh bang? 1,2 sih gue berharap dia ke sana guys. Susi ini nih area Susi cok. Gue udah mapping guys. Sampai atas-atasnya lagi gue mapping. Susi udah hit sini 12680 nya udah di hit. Sempet weak malahan 12689. Ini gue berharap dia ngejar dulu ya, ngejar ke area 1,2 nya guys. Kemungkinan besok baru bisa entry nih. Ini Solana juga gue udah entry tadi di sini. Kita lihat BTC, ETH, wah mulai naik nih. Polkadot anjir gila guys, Polkadot guys. Gak sia-sia gue beli Polkadot cok. Cardano kalau nge-break 0,3 nih cakep banget guys. I'm gonna give up for you. (1834) ETH breakout di area 1850. Kita lihat nih BNB 23924 ya area breakoutnya. Cardano 0,315, Chainlink 11,5 guys area breakoutnya. LTC masih gini-gini aja ya, sama juga nih. BTC semoga naik guys, naik dulu baru bisa entry nih. Sushi 1,2. Bang kalau chart kena naik volumenya turun, pertanda apa? Pertanda mau koreksi itu. Cuma manipulasi dulu guys. Cuma lagi terjadinya manipulasi dulu. Habis itu kita ke Solana. Gua ngincer Solana juga nih. I'm gonna give up for you. Phantom saya long dari 1680 sampai sekarang belum lepas, gila. Cakep banget itu, Bray. Asli, Bre. Bukan main itu mah. GG guys. Anjir gua mau entry apa ya? Woi, masih ada yang bangun gak? GG banget Bims. The real GG itu cok. Sen bang, kenapa Sen? Kita buka satu lagi lah ya. Anjir gak tidur-tidur gue coy. Mata udah sepet. Wah Sen mah bagus banget nih. Sen breakout di 0,37 untuk breakoutnya. Ya semoga dia breakout lah 0,37 nya. Terakhir gue ngelong Sen di 0,28 guys. Nggak nyangka cuy dia bisa naik setinggi ini. Mau gimana? Nggak rezeki. Ya, semoga Sen breakout 0,37. Kalau dia breakout 0,37 tuh mantep banget coy. Udah siap buat take off ke area 0,4. Oktober soalnya guys. Itu yang di spot gua juga hold keras itu guys. Real. Gua mau ngirim sinyal apa ya? Kayaknya gua bakal nge-short dah guys. Nunggu Susi sama Solana ini anjir lah. Semoga naik lagi lah. Masa ini nggak ada backtestnya cowok. Plan gua kok sampai Desember, tenang aja. Desember biasanya merah market coy. Kalem aja. Kalau lu ketinggalan, tapi nggak dapat harganya semurah kemarin kayaknya guys. Kalau kalian beli bisa sih, bisa kalian cari koreksinya. Cuma harga murah kayak kemarin kan kita ngincernya harga murah cowok. Ya nggak sih? Gua ngincernya harga murah kemarin, dapat semua lagi. Kalian kalian kan sering masuk live gua ketik malahan guys. Koin-koin apa aja yang gua beli. Oh, mau entry nggak? Anjir ini Solana, aduh gak dapet guys. Kalau gua hold Solana gua tadi pas di area entry 3446 gua tadi tuh udah mantep banget tuh. Alhamdulillah brother. Bentar guys, gue lagi mikir nih, anjing lah Solana gue telat lagi. Gua sih dapet cok, member gua yang nggak dapet guys. Gimana gitu ya. Babi lah. 1780 bang. Apa 1780 cok? Kalian entry gold gak? Gua entry gold guys. Wah, lumayan nih gua. Kiri kanan laris manis ya. Anjir gua terus terang tapi ya geng saya. Kita sambil santai-santai ya. Anjir kayak trading nih gini-gini aja nggak sih? Kayak bosen nggak cuy? Trading cuy. Gua bosen anjir. Saya long algoran bang, gua nge-short Solana cok. Walaupun kita beda tapi tujuan kita sama, dapat duit. Lu puyeng gua cok. Kasihan member gua guys, gak dapet dia. Gua baru ngetik lagi, mau kirim sinyal tiba-tiba udah rontok guys. Aduh peler ini guys. 0,3 Cardano breakout gak nih? Cardano breakout gak? 315 breakout gak? Kagak, Cok. Kena reject juga nih Cardano nih. 0315 ya. Kata lu trading harus dinikmati, bener guys. Bener banget harus dinikmati. Cuma gua kayaknya tujuan gua udah sampai finish dah, Cok. Gua trading tuh nggak ada lagi semangat anjir. Semoga berkah, amin brother. Thank you doanya. Benar, serius gua. Apa yang bikin gua bisa naik, feel gua bisa naik gitu loh. Gak ada lagi guys. I'm gonna give up. I'm gonna give up for you. Ini PNL gua guys, kalau kalian mau lihat guys. Kita lihat ya. By the way, selamat bang. Waduh, thank you banget brother, udah ngucapin, thank you loh. Kita mencari apa ya? Cari koin yang di long aja lah, karena short kita udah lewat guys. Solananya nggak dapet, Cok. Kasian anak grup gua, mana sebulan lagi nggak gua kasih sinyal cuy. Ada gua kasih sinyal guys, cuma anggap aja gua bilang sama mereka anggap nggak hitung kasih sinyal lah, itu bonus doang. Karena kemarin tante gua sakit, mana lagi turnamen guys. Jadi koin buat di long nih apa ya? Long loom cyber nih baru ya turunnya. Anjir Solana cuk, gima lah. Kita cari koin yang bisa di long, koin yang di long. Koin buat di long. Oh, ini 15 menit cuy. Tersalah lagi gua kalau 15 menit. Bluebird. Di XY turun ya. Di XY turun gold harusnya naik guys. Kita bakal entry apa nih? Kita lihat people 4 jamnya jelek banget guys, belum tentu break. Cardano nih hampir ngebreak nih. Polkadot, anjir Solana jauh banget cok turunnya cok. Gimana? TRB bang, coba TRB Solana gua 400% guys. Anjir gila Solana cok. Alik. Sayang banget anjir. TRB gila ya, 111 cuy. Buset. Confluence di 103 sekarang. Dia buat fraktal ya, fraktal di area confluence di 111 457 ya. Jadi lagi make a fraktal guys. Masih samar kalau dia lagi make a fraktal. OGN juga masih kena reject ini OGN. Ini OGN kalau ngebreak nih mantep banget nih. Anjir lah. Begadang gua sia-sia dong kalau nggak dapet sinyal guys. BCH juga fraktal. Optimism. Aduh puyeng gua guys. Anjir lah. Real cuy. Puyeng banget gua. Agak fair. Tunggu naik aja. Jam 3 nggak sih bang? Ya tunggu jam 3 closing time frame 4 jam. Ya bagusnya besok lah guys. Besok pagi. Kecuali lu yang ngambil gold ataupun ngambil yang apa gitu. Gold juga tuh harus closing di atas 1982 ya. Kalau enggak berat guys. Alah peler lah. Kalau enggak lihat besok pagi aja ya. Ya, sorry telat. Kasian banget cok. Fed cakep nih cuy. Fed VChain ya. Ini berharap koreksi lah guys. Besok baru bisa masuk long nih. Beberapa koin masuk long. Ada yang bisa masuk long, ada yang bisa masuk short. Tinggal kita pilih aja kita mau yang masuk yang mana guys. Uni ini nyusul memang nih. Nyusul siapa tuh? Susi. Ini Dex lagi dimainin guys. Bajingan lah. Semoga masih bisa lah besok. Besok buat gold masih ada NFP guys. Non farm payroll besok. Bentar gua lihat news. NFP Hari ini BOE ya, Bank of England, suku bunga Bank of England guys, jam 7 malam. Habis itu jobless claim Bank of England besok ternyata. Besok baru NFP di hari Jumat. I'm gonna give up. I'm gonna give up for you. IMX cakep nggak bang? IMX bentar gue cari ya. Mana nih IMX gue nih? IMX cakep cuy, cuma kita butuh koreksi kalau mau ngelong. Iya nggak? Kalau nggak ada koreksi bahaya guys. Cardano nih break nih 3015, tinggal closing aja, harus di atas 3015 guys. Ah mantep banget ini. Udah ya gengs, kalian udah mau nanya apa lagi nggak? Hampir jam 3 cok. Mana besok bangun pagi. Sen ini bull flag guys. Salah lagi gue nariknya coy. Sen is a bull flag. Bullish flag. Cuma kita nggak tahu nih koreksinya di mana gitu loh. Ya kemungkinan bisa lah sen 3450, habis itu dia mantul ya kan. Sen is a bull flag. Tapi time frame 1 jam ya. Time frame 4 jamnya oke lah. Oke gengs, thank you banget buat kalian udah mampir. Nanti kita ketemu lagi di esok hari. Mungkin siang gue terabar juga sambil live. Kemungkinan. Oke, thank you buat kalian udah mampir. See you on the next video. Bye bye bro.